population. So they were 100 times more than the proportion according to the population. The first Jews which are documented in Italy are already in Roman times. They are documented in Rome, but also in other parts of the Roman Empire. It is known that embassies were sent to Rome in order to try to sign some treaties with Rome already at the time of the Maccabees. However, the first sizable contingent of Jews which in Italy seem to have arrived as slaves shortly after the invasion of Israel by Pompey in 63, between 63 and 61 before Common Era. So they were already there even 60 years before Common Era. And this is also confirmed by the fact that Julius Caesar and the following emperors explicitly granted them the freedom to perform their religious duties. So they were already there, although their numbers seem to have increased considerably only under Augustus. Later on, we have, of course, the Jewish struggle in Judea against the Romans, and this resulted in a great number, again, of Jewish slaves being brought to Italy. The sources we have indicate something around 1,500 of them settling in Rome and 5,000 in southern Italy, especially in the region of Apulia. They were soon these slaves. They were soon be freed by other Jews which were already living in the country, and most of them decided to remain in Italy afterwards. As far as Roman emperors are concerned, most of them showed a benevolent attitude towards them, and Jews were included, like the other nations, in the Edict of Caracalla, which gave the Roman citizenship to all the citizens of the Roman Empire. So it is estimated that during the first century of the empire, there were already around 50,000 Jews in Italy, more or less half of them living in Rome or in nearby towns, and most of the rest in the south. For instance, it is noted that there were already 12 synagogues in Rome, although not of them maybe at the same time. This trend continued, and in the first 3 centuries of the empire, Jews were mostly living either in Rome or in the south of Italy. We had many Jewish inscriptions were found in many, for instance, many port towns, including Pompeii, by the way. There was a Jewish inscription in Pompeii, of South Italy and in the region of Campania, Basilicata, Calabria, Apulia, and Sicily. While Jewish presence is not documented, or there are only very few documents concerning their presence in North Italy. North Italy was practically devoid, empty of Jews at that time, which is the contrary of what will happen after 1492, and we'll see why. So where does the real problem start? They were citizens of the Roman Empire, and the real problem for them starts, quite unsurprisingly, with the official recognition of Christianity as the religion of the Roman Empire. Because the church immediately tries to promulgate laws that would restrict the religious practice of the Jews, limit their political rights, isolate them socially, isolate them economically, with a panoply of measures which had the goal of trying to convert them to Christianity. So from the time of Emperor Constantino onwards, Jews were barred, for instance, from owning slaves, which was an important thing at the time. They could not marry people. They could not marry people of other religions, and it was strictly forbid to convert to Judaism, which was, in fact, it happened quite often in the first 3 centuries of the empire. Moreover, we had some bishops which encouraged violence in Rome, violence against the Jews. We know that synagogues were destroyed. Also the erection, the building of new synagogues was forbidden. This is something that continued for a long time, especially also in the Arab world. But the building of new synagogue, in fact, was always a problem around Europe, and it was started by the church. So the pressure of the church resulted at the end in the legal code of Theodosius and Justinian in the 5th and 6th centuries, enshrining legally the inferior status of Jews as citizens. When the Roman Empire falls, the situation in Italy changed quite often in the next centuries. In general, the Goths, the German tribes were quite benevolent towards them, while the Byzantines, which were occupying mostly South Italy, they were much worse, because the Byzantines tried to forcibly convert them, they persecuted them, as this happened, for instance, in the region of Apulia in the 9th and 10th century. The best, let's say, part of Italy at the time for Jews to live in was probably Sicily, because Sicily was conquered by the Arabs for 2 centuries, and this provided beneficial for them. In the same way in which the Arab conquest was beneficial to the Spanish Jews when the Arab arrived, because they were in Spain. They were terribly also persecuted by the Visigoths. So the arrival of the Jews of the Arabs in Sicily brought stability in the legal situation of the Jews. So by the end of the 11th century, we find many Jewish communities in south of Italy, a sizable community in Rome, and just a few scattered communities north of Rome. We have some documentation for Verona, Pavia, Lucca, but not much. As far as their economic activities are concerned, we have little information from the fall of the Roman Empire up to the 11th century. But we know, for instance, from scattered information such as tombstones, inscription, also some chronicles, that at least in South Italy, they were mainly artisans, merchants, dyers, and silk weavers, with a few also engaging in farming. There were also already some Talmudic academies in Rome and in other few towns in the south. A big source of information for Italian Jews is Benjamin of Tudela, the famous Spanish Jew from Navarra who traveled a lot in the Mediterranean. So he came to Italy and visited most South Italy around 1163, and he found, for instance, in towns like Salerno, Capua, and Benevento, flourishing Jewish communities composed of hundreds of individuals, as well as in other towns like Melfi, Otranto, Trani, Taranto, so in Apulia. And he says that such Jewish communities have been established there since many centuries. Also, Benjamin of Tudela, he writes that most Jews at the time were artisans, while the trade activity and interestingly, the money-changing activity at the time was dominated by Christians. So a situation which is totally different in the 11th century in the 12th century from the one which we'll find just a couple of centuries later around throughout Italy. So in the 12th and 13th centuries, situation doesn't change much. We only have few and small communities north of Rome. We have a number of them in Tuscany. We have around 200 Jewish families in Rome, which were maintaining in general good relation with the Christian population. But the church maintained its religious and legal pressure. The Third Lateral Council, in fact, forbade the Jews to employ Christian servants. But let's say the biggest problem was the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. And this council had a number of conclusions which were extremely negative for the Jews, not only in Italy, but all around Europe, for instance, in Spain, in France, in England. Because this council was convened by Pope Innocent III, and he decreed, as a conclusion of the council, that the Jews had to be in a position of perpetual serfdom, and they were forced to wear a badge on their garments so that they could be distinguished from Christians. This in practice didn't always happen afterwards, but of course, the fact that it was a decree from the church created a lot of problems for Jews in the following centuries around Europe. Shortly afterwards, the Pope decided to establish the Inquisition. It was nothing about the Spanish Inquisition at the time, but it was still Inquisition. And the friars, especially the Dominican friars, they started to deal also with the Jews, and also in the 13th century, the campaign and agitation against the Talmud, which had started in France in 1240 and reached Aragon and Castilla, also reached Italy. In 1278, for the first time, we know that Jews were compelled to listen to Christian sermons in Lombardy, in the Lombardy region, in 1278. The exception was South Italy, because South Italy at the time was under a very illuminated monarch, Frederick II. It was king of Sicily, but Sicily doesn't mean only Sicily, because at the time, to be king of Sicily meant also to be the king of the whole of South Italy. And most important, he was the Holy Roman Emperor from the year 1220 onwards. He was often at war with the papacy. He was excommunicated 4 times by the Pope, and he extended his personal protection to all the Jews, let them live in peace according to their religion, their customs. But amazingly, he also gave them complete monopoly of the silk weaving and foreign trade. So it was really something amazing for the time in Europe. This didn't last long, unfortunately, because the French Angevin dynasty occupied South Italy. They depended a lot on the support of the church, so their attitude towards Jews changes considerably. And for the first time in 1290, we find the first case of blood libel in Italy. So Jews were accused of committing human sacrifices and having killed a Christian child. This happened, by the way, 1.5 centuries after the famous episode here in England, in Norwich, where Jews were accused to having